The Complete Grimm's Fairy Tales, The Girl Without Hands. A certain miller had little by little fallen into poverty and had nothing left but his mill and a large apple tree behind it. Once, when he had gone into the forest to fetch wood, an old man stepped up to him, whom he had never seen before. "Why do you plague yourself with cutting wood? I will make you rich if you will promise me what is standing behind your mill." "What can that be but my apple tree?" thought the miller. "Yes," and he gave a written promise to the stranger. He, however, laughed mockingly and said, "When 3 years have passed, I will come and carry away what belongs to me." And then he went. When the miller got home, his wife came to meet him and said, "Tell me, miller, from whence comes sudden wealth into our house? All at once, every box and chest was filled, and no one brought it in, and I don't know how it happened." He answered, "It comes from a stranger who met me in the forest and promised me a great treasure. In return, I have promised him what stands behind the mill, and we will give him the big apple tree for it." "Oh, husband," said the terrified wife, "that must have been the devil. He did not mean the apple tree, but our daughter, who is standing behind the mill sweeping the yard." The miller's daughter was a beautiful, pious girl, and who lived with 3 years in the fear of God and without sin. When therefore the time was over, and the day came when the evil one was to fetch her, she washed herself clean and made a circle round herself with chalk. The devil appeared quite early, and he could not come to her. Angrily he said to the miller, "Take all the water away from her, and she will no longer be able to wash herself, for otherwise I have no power over her." The miller was afraid and did so. The next morning the devil came again, but she had swept on her hands, and they were quite clean. Again he could not get near her, and furiously he said to the miller, "Cut her hands off, or I will have no power over her." The miller was shocked and answered, "How could I cut off the hands of my own child?" Then the evil one threatened him and said, "If you do not do it, you are mine, and I will your, take you yourself." The father became alarmed and promised to obey him. So he went to the girl and said, "My child, if I do not cut off both your hands, the devil will carry me away, and in my terror I promised him to do it. Help me in my need and forgive the harm I do you." She replied, "Dear father, do with me what you will. I am your child." Thereupon she laid down both her hands and let them be cut off. The devil came for the third time, but she had wept so long and so much on the stumps that after all they were quite clean. Then he had to give in, and he had lost all rights over her. The miller said, "I have by means of you received such great wealth that I will keep you most handsomely as long as you live." But she replied, "Here I cannot stay. I will go forth. Compassionate people will give me as much as I require." Thereupon she caused her maimed arms to be bound to her back, and by sunrise she set out on her way, and she walked the whole day until night fell. She came to a royal garden, and by the shimmering of the moon she saw that trees were covered with beautiful fruit and grew in it, but she could not enter, for it was surrounded by water. As she had walked the whole day and not eaten one mouthful, and hunger tormented her, she thought, "Ah, if I were but inside, I might eat fruit, else I might die of hunger." But she knelt down and called to the Lord and prayed, and suddenly an angel came toward her, who made a dam of water so that the moat became dry and she could walk through it. And now she went into the garden, and the angel went with her. She saw a tree covered into the garden, an angel, and the angel she saw a bee, excuse me. She saw a tree covered with beautiful pears, but they were all counted. Soon she went to them, and still with hunger she ate one with her mouth from the tree, but no more. The gardener was watching, but as the angel was standing by, he was afraid and thought the maiden was a spirit, and was silent, and neither dared cry out nor speak with her. When she had eaten the pear, she was satisfied, and went and concealed herself among some bushes. The king to whom the garden belonged came down the next morning, and counted, and saw that one of the pears was missing, and asked the gardener what had become of it. And it was he was not lying, and is why was he not lying beneath the tree when it was, and that's why it was gone. Then he answered the gardener, "Last night a spirit came in with no hands and ate off of one of the pears with its mouth." The king said, "How did the spirit get over the water, and where did it go after it eaten the pear?" The gardener answered, "Someone came in snow white garment from heaven, who made the dam and kept the water back, and the spirit might walk through the moat. And as if it had been an angel, I was afraid and had no questions, and I did not want to cry out. When the spirit had eaten the pear, it went back again." The king said, "If it be as you say, I will watch again tonight." When it grew dark, the king came to the garden and brought a priest with him, who was to speak to the spirit. All three seated themselves beneath the tree and watched. At midnight, the maiden came creeping out through the thicket, went to the tree, and again ate one pear off with her mouth, and besides her stood the angel in the white garments. Then the priest went out to them and said, "Do you come from heaven or from earth? Are you a spirit or a human being?" And she replied, "I am no spirit, but an unhappy mortal, deserted by all but God." The king said, "If you are forsaken in all the world, yet I will not forsake you." He took her with him into the royal palace, and she was so beautiful and good, he loved her with all his heart, and had silver hands made for her, and took her to be his wife. After a year, the king had to go on a journey, and so he commended to his young queen to take care of his mother, and said, "If she is brought to childbed, take care of her, and nurse her well, and tell me at once of it in a letter." Then she gave birth to a fine boy. So the old mother made haste to write and announce the joyful news to him. But the messenger rested by a brook on the way, and he was fatigued at a great distance, and he fell asleep. Then came the devil, who was always seeking to injure the good queen, and exchanged the letter for another, in which was written the queen had brought a monster into the world. And the king read the letter and was shocked and much troubled. And he wrote in answer that there was to take great care of the queen and nurse her well until his arrival. The messenger went back with the letter, but rested in the same place and fell asleep again. Then came the devil, and once more he put a different letter into the pocket, which was written that they were to put the queen and the child and her child to death. The old mother was terribly shocked when she received the letter, and could not believe it. She wrote back again to the king, but received no other answer, because each time the devil substituted a false letter. And the last letter was also written that she was to preserve the queen's tongue and eyes as a token that she had obeyed. But the old mother wept to think that such innocent blood was to be shed, and had a hind brought by the night, and cut out her tongue and eyes, and kept them. Then she said to the queen, "I cannot have you killed as the king commands, and here you may stay no longer. Go forth into the wide world with your child, and never come here again." The poor woman tied her child onto her back, and went away with her eyes full of tears. She came into a great wild forest, and there she fell upon her knees and prayed, uh, and an angel appeared before her, and led her to a little house, and which was the sign of the words, "Here all dwell free." And a snow white maiden came out of the little house, and said, "Welcome, lady queen," and conducted her inside. Then she unbound the little boy from her back, and held him to her breast, so that he might feed, and laid him in a beautifully laid bed. Then he said to the poor woman, she then said to the poor woman, "From hence do you know that I was a queen?" The white maiden answered, "I am an angel sent to watch over you and your child." The queen stayed for 7 years in the little house, and was well cared for. And because of her piety, her hands, which had been cut off, had begun to grow once more. At last the king came home again from his journey, and his first wish was to see his wife and child. Then his aged mother began to weep, and said, "You wicked man, why did you write to me that I was to take those two innocent lives?" And she showed him the letters from the evil one had forged, and continued, "I did as you bade me." And she showed him the tokens of the tongue and the eyes. And then the king began to weep for his poor wife and little son, so bitterly that when she was doing, she thought the aged mother had compassion on him, and said, "Be at peace. She still lives. I secretly caused a hind to be killed, and took these tokens from it. But I bound the child to your wife's back, and bade her to go forth into the wide world, and made her promise never to come back here again, because you were so angry with her." Then spoke the king, "I will go as far as the sky is blue, and will neither eat nor drink until I have found again my dear wife and my child. And in the meantime they have not been killed nor died of hunger." Thereupon the king travelled about for 7 long years, and sought her every day in clefts of rocks and every cave, but he found her not, and thought she would die of want. During the whole of this time he neither ate nor drank, but God supported him. At length he came into a forest, and found therein a little house, whose sign was, "Here all dwell free." Then forth came the white maiden, who took him by the hand, and said, "Welcome, Lord King," and asked him from whence he came. He answered, "Soon I shall have travelled in the space of 7 years. I seek my wife and child, but cannot find them." The angel offered him meat and drink, but did not take anything, and only wished to rest a while. Then he lay down to sleep, and laid a handkerchief over his face. Thereupon the angel went into a chamber where the queen sat with her son, whom she usually called Sorrowful, and said to go out with the child, your husband has come. So she went to the place where he lay, and the handkerchief fell from his face. She then said she, Sorrowful, pick up your father's handkerchief and cover his face again. The child picked it up and put it over his face. The king had heard in his sleep what passed, and had pleasure in letting the handkerchief fall once more. But the child grew impatient and said, Dear mother, how can I cover my father's face when I have no father in this world? I have learned to only say the Lord's Prayer, and how can I know what this wild man is like? He is not my father. When the king heard it, he got up and asked who they were. Then said she, I am your wife, and this is your son, Sorrowful. And he saw her living hands and said, My wife had silver hands. And she answered, The good Lord has caused my natural hands to grow again. And the angel went into the inner room and brought the silver hands and showed them to him. Hereupon he knew for certainty that it's your wife and child, and he kissed them and was glad. A heavy stone has fallen from my heart. And the angel ate with them again once more. And after they went home to the king's aged mother, was great rejoicing everywhere, and the king and queen were married again and lived contentedly to their happy end.